What's up, Pinecones? Today, we're talking about English, and not the English language, but the study of English in academia. We got three videos, and yeah, let's just start watching it. I'm here with my friend Ethan. He will be providing
Hello.
commentary. Did you want to, oh, yeah, I'll introduce myself in a moment, but did you want to say anything about yourself, Ethan? You're free to, you don't have to either.
Yeah, I have no credentials whatsoever. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
I have my bachelor's degree in creative and professional writing, and I am just about to receive my master's in like a couple months in creative writing as well. So I've been studying English, both just like in businesses and in creative writing and literature and all that for 5.5 years now, with no breaks, which is a lot, but I've learned a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about
Um,
it.
no, that's good. That's good. I didn't know you did professional writing as well.
Yeah.
So, um, I got my master's in English with a focus on rhetoric, and my bachelor's was in English and philosophy. So, Ethan and I have a similar, we have a shared background, but also relatively distinct too, because I've never done any creative writing.
Mhm.
Okay, let's start this video. Let me know if this is too fast. I
What's worse than book burning? It's forgetting.
think this is the wrong
This is the
video.
wrong video.
Exactly. Okay.
There is a crisis in academia, notably in the humanities, and more specifically in the field of literature, the art of literature, understanding it, appreciating it, and getting the beauty out of it into the world. You see, when there's a problem at the top in academia, the consequences filter down to the common person and daily life. To give you an idea of this crisis, the New Yorker ran an article a while ago, and it revealed a statistic that from 2012 to 2020 in American universities, the enrollment of students majoring in English literature dropped from 10 to 5%. So 50% drop. Of course, in certain liberal arts colleges that focus expressly on the arts, there was an equilibrium, but across major universities, including big ones like Harvard, a drop of 50%, some 75% enrollment drop. There's also a collapsing interest in literature within high schools. Teachers talk about finding it much harder to get pupils interested in literature itself. Now, there is a knock-on effect. Whether you're someone who loves literature or not, a lot of people don't appreciate just why the arts exist. I'm not going into that in this video. What I am going to do is we're going to take a look at the first of 5 reasons I feel that there is a decaying of appreciation for fine literature. And the other 4 will come in a sequence of individual talks over the coming weeks. So let's have a look at the first cause for the decaying of interest in literature.
Okay, a quick point I want to get across is that a position I'm going to take throughout these videos is that the authors are representing a conservative approach to literature, in the sense that they're viewing um recent changes or recent influences on English studies as being defective, and that they think that we should return to the gold standard of literary theory and English criticism, um, which they lay out a little bit. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that what they're presenting is ideologically conservative.
No,
Um,
that's fair. I'm gonna I I feel like most of what my personal views on these is going to be is that most people who make arguments on these topics have, I think, an incomplete picture of it. I'm not even saying that I have a complete picture of it, but I think there are usually more factors to consider than a single video on a single topic can necessarily portray.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think that kind of anticipates an objection that I have with a lot of these is that the conclusion of their argument is very strong. They're saying there's something extraordinarily defective about all of English studies right now, amongst like the entire I don't know, like Anglo-American uh university system for the humanities. But it's like that maybe you're right, but if you're right, you need a lot of evidence and it needs to be really strong. And unfortunately, like a 20-minute YouTube video is not going to get you that much evidence. You could still put your view out there, but ultimately it's not, you don't, you need more time than that to make a strong enough argument. That's what I think.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And of course, the same thing applies to us. We're not being hypocrites here, but
Good point. Good point.
but I do agree. I think this will be an interesting discussion, just being able to sort of see if we can counter anything that they're saying or expand on the things that they're saying and see if they missed any specific points.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the way that I'm approaching it, um, is not speaking as a super authoritative figure saying this is why they're wrong. Rather, I'm sharing my perspective as a former English student that I think is inconsistent with what they say. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
By the way, if you enjoy talks which give you something to think about and to chew on and form your own opinion, be sure to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell especially, otherwise you'll miss the upcoming videos when they come out. Naturally, when there is a decline of interest in any field or topic, it stems ultimately from people not seeing its value, maybe being disinterested in it because of that, not seeing its relevance. But how has that come to take place in literature? Literature is one of the foundation blocks of the academy. Universities, for time gone by since they started, were interested in crafting and reading the best that literature could offer as one of the arts. But now it's dying out. One student said they consider the humanities, of which English literature is one, to be more of a hobby kind of thing. And yet it used to be viewed as essential. Why the difference? Well, the first reason I'm going to present to you is because in academia, and by that I don't mean every individual professor, every teacher, there are brilliant, brilliant teachers of this, but there is an academia problem here. One of the things they're doing is they're approaching literature with the wrong tools. I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. They're approaching it mainly as sociology and not literature. Now, let's unpack this and see how it has an effect. So, when you look around, if you go and look for lectures on the classics, okay, for instance, or interviews of people talking about should Shakespeare be taught in school, all that kind of stuff, or just on literature, if you look at papers on literature and class titles, you'll notice a trend that has been growing for quite a while, specifically over the last decade and a bit more. And that is the use of words like toxic masculinity, racism, entrenched institutes of power, oppression, feminism, anti-capitalism. Now, what I want to say about those things, because I know for a lot of people this is a hot political topic, not here it's not. That's not what we're here for. What I want to mention about those topics is they're all sociological topics. They're not necessarily literature. Literature can talk to them, talk about them, but a study of literature is not those things. If your focus is primarily on those things, you're looking at how literature has influenced society, not the literature itself. And that is a big mistake. It's using the wrong tool. It's like trying to weigh yourself with a thermometer. You know, you may want to use the thermometer, and the thermometer is a brilliant tool, but it's not the right one for the job. Now, I want to take it
Can
as
we
a
pause here
given
for a second?
that
I I want to double check with you if you're hearing the same thing that I'm hearing. It sounds like he is saying that there is a pipeline that goes from literature to sociology and not the other way around. Like it what I'm hearing him say is that like if you are trying to use literature as a means to understand the sociological like time period that literature came from or the sociological I guess ideas within literature and how they apply to the world in which that piece of literature was written, that that is like incorrect. And I strongly disagree with that immediately. I don't, it's certainly not one-sided. I think that what he's saying about literature affecting sociology and like the world at large is totally valid because like literature, especially when it's spread across like larger spaces and through like the masses of people, can have a sociological effect. But I feel like there are so many pieces of literature that are written specifically with like sociological principles in mind. Maybe not like on a level of like, I'm gonna write this fiction story to talk about one specific sociological principle. But if you're talking, like, think about like anything that Toni Morrison has ever written.
Exactly. That's what I was
Like,
gonna say.
it's 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 all about like systematic oppression and racism and like ah I really feel like he's missing the mark here if he's completely ignoring that. And like the idea of like trying to weigh yourself with a thermometer, it's like, no, that's not what this is. It's just that it's a two-way street and you're arguing that it's not. And that doesn't really make any sense, at least
Right.
not to me.
I agree. I completely agree. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot. One thing I wanted to say is he's trying to explain. So he says, interest in the humanities is dropping, which, as far as I'm aware, is accurate. But he tries to explain that by saying that it's because we're talking about this woke nonsense. That's essentially what he's saying. He's saying we're here to study literature, not toxic masculinity. If you want to study toxic masculinity, go take a sociology class. Um, I I personally think that people are losing interest in the humanities due to anti-intellectualism and an overemphasis on STEM and a kind of
Hmm.
scientific worldview. And that kind of plays into the video, but ultimately, I think it's best to leave that aside mostly. But I agree with what you're saying. I think, yeah, I have a lot to say about what you said. I think I'll let him flesh out his ideas a little bit more, and then I'll kind of speak to that. But I definitely agree with the observations you were making.
I'm excited to talk more about how STEM is overemphasized. Yeah, no, I'm excited about this. Let's keep it
We
going.
should, okay, yeah.
Irrespective of your views, any of those topics mentioned, where confronted in society, they should be talked about, they should be dealt with. That's a given. But nonetheless, it's a distraction from literature because literature is not about those things. Literature is literature.
Okay, I gotta
Okay, so
stop.
it's so
Oh, did you want to go? I mean, I can go, but do you want to say something?
I feel like he just walked straight into what I just said about how literature is not just literature. There is literature that is just literature. I get it. I forget. I think it was a Hemingway quote someone shared with me recently about the old man and the sea. He's like, the
Hmm.
old man is the old man, the sea is the sea. There is no symbolism. And
Yeah.
it's just like there is literature for literature's sake. Uh, but that's not everything. That is not the catch-all. And
Exactly.
maybe he'll get to it, but he has not defined literature, and I'm wondering what his specific definition of it is. Because people get kind of picky in
Right.
academics about what it is, not necessarily just like I Googled the Google definition of literature earlier, and it was something along the lines of like written works that are considered to have long-lasting and immense artistic value. I think that was at least
Yeah.
semi-close. I wonder if that's what he's talking about specifically when he says literature, or if he has a different definition.
No, that's a good point. Um, and it's difficult. If you want, the thing is, if you want to give a theory, or if you want to give a definition of literature, you need a theory of literature. And these, the kind of ideology that these people are purporting are like almost anti-theory. So it's kind of like, oh, well, Derrida has a theory of literature. Well, I don't like Derrida. Well, okay, well, like, what about this other theorist? It's like, well, I don't like theory. Well, oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
and I'll put, okay, here's my first argument against him though. Anybody, anybody that studies literature knows that literature is about the human condition. And that's not a restrictive definition. That's just saying like literature is about what it means to be a person in all of its different facets. And unsurprisingly, politics and power are a pretty big part of the human condition. So like that's gonna play in to literature if you're talking about the world, you know. It's not necessary. It well, arguably it's not necessary that like every text is about class warfare or class relations, uh, you know, or
Mhm.
racism or something. But like it probably will be in the text. Um I have so much more to say about that specific argument, but I think I kind of let him say a little bit more and then piece out my objections.
No,
You
that's
know,
fair.
It's a very individual thing. That's something that's going to be talked about in the next point next week. It's an individual thing of the artist and an individual thing of the reader. But let's get back to this idea of looking at literature as sociology rather than literature itself. So, I recently read a paper, and I'm using this paper as my example specifically because I thought it was a good paper. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It was engaging, thought-provoking, and excellently written. But as I read it, there was a problem that came to my attention. Now, the paper itself is called Frailty, Thy Name Be Toxic Masculinity. And of course, that's a play on Shakespeare's word, Thy Name is Woman. Now, this paper focuses in on Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And it first starts by setting Hamlet up, saying, that Hamlet, it does mention Hamlet's a masterpiece, and it focuses that this is not really a new concept, Hamlet. It's based off, an earlier revenge play, which set the foundation for a lot of other plays like it. But then the paper goes on to want to focus on Ophelia in Hamlet, a great topic to focus on. Ophelia is the main female role in the play. Now, the paper begins to talk about the lack of Ophelia's voice, the lack of her perspective in this mimesis of family politics in which Hamlet is the main protagonist. We don't get Ophelia's backstory. We don't get fully explained her sudden acting of madness. It's just something that's there for the plot for Hamlet to develop upon. And then the paper goes on to talk about two other works, one a film and a book, and the other just a film, where they develop the idea of the backstory of Ophelia herself, and how that's presented and how it ends as well. And that's all excellent. I really, really enjoyed it, and I mean that, so I'm not dissing the paper. But the reason I bring it up for this video is as I read through it, I began thinking, this isn't about Hamlet, nor is it really about Ophelia. This is about how to represent a person differently. In other words, it's about how to write a different story altogether. Now, of course,
I don't think that's accurate. Now, I haven't read the article, so I can't say too much about it, nor would I want to because, I didn't read it. However, let's say you read Hamlet and you want to interrogate the narrative function of Ophelia. You know, what role does she have in the plot? What is her characterization? How does Ophelia's progression as a character interact with the cultural norms of the time period in which it was written? Uh, and how does all of that interact with um, power relations or other texts in the time period? Um, how do how does Ophelia, being a woman as a character, how does her characterization interact with other women in Shakespeare's plays or just other, literature of that time period? Those are all questions about the text. You're
Yeah.
interrogating the text. And like those are all questions that that he seems to be rejecting. It's like that's not I personally don't think it's sociology. If someone wants to classify it as sociology, I'm totally cool with that. But it doesn't
I
mean
could
it's not
see that
literature.
being what it's called. Yeah.
I I don't yeah, I think maybe okay, yeah, maybe I think if someone wants to call it sociology, that's fine. But let's just assume it's sociology. It doesn't mean it's not literary studies, you know?
Hmm.
Those are still valid questions to ask about the text. Um, so did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I feel like this is an issue of I see this come up a lot when it comes to people analyzing creative works. I'm going to draw a comparison to this, and then I'm going to talk more about what I actually want to say. Um, Currently, one of the courses I'm taking right now, I am reading a book called Forms of Fiction by Beth Lorden. And it's a great book. It's about sort of the structures of sentences and of paragraphs and how that sort of emphasizes and amplifies a given text. Just because the structure is mirroring something about the character or something about the story in itself. Um, it's a fascinating read. I would recommend that people read it. But one of the things that's come up a lot with me and some friends of mine who are also in the course is that Lorden really, really breaks down all of these individual structures to a degree that almost feels excessive. And it's one of those things. I'm trying to think of a specific example um, that came up recently. Um, let's see here. I apologize for the brief moment because I'm literally holding the book and trying to find something specific. I can't find the page that it's on. But regardless, the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a way to analyze a piece of literature to the point where you are kind of just reaching a little bit, like grasping at straws. And I'm not saying that like Beth Lorden isn't seeing anything in the text, but it may not be what the author was intending. There are so many things that end up in literature that just kind of show up for just kind of happenstance, or like maybe the author was instinctually a good enough writer that there's just something in there that they didn't intend that people can dig into. And a lot of times people will compare this to the joke of like English teachers saying like, "Why were the curtains blue? Why were they blue?" And it's like, okay, does it matter? Did the author intend for the curtains to be blue? The reason I'm talking about this, I guess, is that when it comes to like analyzing characters like Ophelia and Hamlet, you can analyze it as much as you want. There's a certain level of detail that you get to, though, where you have to ask yourself, did Shakespeare intend this to be broken down to this level? And I'm not saying that you can't go past that, but you you get to a point where you are researching something because it's interesting and you are trying to make a point about like the time period that it came from, and you kind of have to remove the author from the text. I'm I may end up getting to the point where I'm rambling a little bit here, but I just think it's interesting that you can get so far from the initial text when you are researching something. And it starts to get into intersectionality when you're talking about like a text and its relation to sociology, a text and its relation to like the biological understanding of a time period. Like you can totally do these things and it's totally valid and there's a lot to be learned there. And I think that arguing against that and saying that you just need to look at the literature itself is frustrating. I understand the point behind it because, like I said, like sometimes I read Beth Lorden and I'm thinking, why are you breaking this down to such a degree? But also, it's interesting, and there are maybe some things there that are helpful to learn, like as a writer or as someone who's interested in sociology, things like that. I
Yeah.
hope that made sense. I kind of got on a soapbox a little bit there and rambled a bit about things that I'm currently researching and am interested in, but I don't know.
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, you're good. You're good. You're good. I like that. I thought that brought up some good points. I think that kind of approach is really interesting to approaching literature. I think so. You brought up authorial intention, which I wanted to comment on briefly. I'm still developing and figuring out my own views on the relationship between authorial intention and uh, interpretations of a text. But the standard argument to put authorial intentions to the side a pretty good amount is that um, let's say you make a billboard and you put it outside and people start reading it and you intend it to be uh okay, I'll give an example. Somebody put a sticker outside this light post that me and my friend saw recently, and it was a photo of Trump with the word fascist on top of his head. And we were like, and he asked me, he was like, "Do you think this is like pro-Trump or anti-Trump?" And I was like, "I don't know." Like, and so we started analyzing the text. Well, it's red and his face is to the side and it says fascist in big bold letters. So it's probably anti-fascist. So it's probably anti-Trump. Um, but none of that appeals to the author's intentions. You know, what it, maybe she intended it to be pro-Trump. And it's like, he's a fascist. Hell yeah. I'm gonna put it on this post so other people see that um and I think and the thing is that sticker is a text just like literature is a text. You know, you read a book and it's like, well, what did the author think? Well, the text is doing something at this point, regardless of what the author said. So we can just analyze what the text is doing. And if you want to say, well, what it's doing is not what the author intended, I'm totally down for exploring that. But it's still doing that. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. No,
That,
I think
like,
there's definitely, sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good.
There's definitely something to be said about once an author is done with a text and it is released to the public, the author's intentions, I mean, the author, what was it? The author dies, isn't that what people say? The death of the author. It becomes more about the reader interpretation than it is about the author in the first place. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's definitely a relationship there where things can get bent or skewed, and because of that bending or skewing, I think there's a lot to be researched about what the author's original intentions were.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's definitely not an easy answer because then you do get like I don't know if the quote is like accurate or apocryphal, but you get the Hemingway quote where it's like, I just wanted to write about an old man in the sea. There's no like Jungian archetype in here, you know?
Sure.
The topic itself of stories developing from previous stories, I think it's White Sargasso Sea, isn't it? That Jean Rhys developed, taking a character from Jane Eyre. That's been done from time immemorial. A lot of the Greek myths and legends are just someone building off different characters that they saw in other of the legends. So there's nothing wrong with that, but the title itself gives away the angle that this paper is intended, which is to slightly bemoan the fact that Ophelia is not represented very well in Hamlet. Now, representation, again, I don't think anyone disagrees that people should be represented and people should have a right to represent themselves. But that's sociology. That is not literature. And yes, you can use literature in sociology.
It's just not accurate. It's not true. Um, if you're asking text about literature, then you're doing literary studies. Like I don't need like I feel like doesn't need to be a bigger, stronger argument than that. If you're asking a
Just to
text about
clarify, you said if you ask a text about literature, did you mean ask a text about sociology?
I meant, or I'll restate what I meant to say, which was, uh, if you ask a text about if you start asking questions and the subject matter has to do with literature, then that's literary studies.
Oh, I see. I misunderstood. I see what you're saying.
Okay, yeah, you're good. So if you're asking like, okay, and I don't know, it seems so weird that he's making this argument because the whole point of one of the things like literature does is it represents stuff. Uh, that's how the meaning is conveyed. It's conveyed through representation, which is just like almost a tautology. Like it's just like an obvious statement. So if you ask yourself, well, how is Ophelia represented? That's still literary studies, you know? Like, I don't know. So,
Oh
hmm,
yeah. I'm curious what his argument is going to be that like what should we be? it's the same thing where I'm feeling like, oh, he didn't give a definition of what he thought literature was, and now I'm curious, like he's saying this is not the focus that we should have. I'm curious if I'm assuming he's about to get what we should be focusing on, and I'm wondering what that is.
I hope so. I can't remember if he goes into it too much. We'll see.
And literature can talk about these topics, but you're not studying the work itself. So I want to show you where this leads, unwittingly maybe. I began digging deeper on this idea, and I found quite a number of papers, and their focus seemed to be, or not just seemed, were, on what wasn't in a work. Now we're talking especially the classics here, with the word problematic, which keeps cropping up. It's focusing on what's not in a work. So I'll give you an example. Jane Austen, fabulous writer, one of the best writers in the English language, in my opinion. There was a work that asked the question, where are the voices of the servants in Jane Austen's works? Another one took up the fact that lower class women are not represented in Jane Austen's work. How about Othello by Shakespeare, where it was critiqued for not paying enough attention to the expanding colonialist intentions of the state of Venice? Or there's Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, and the question, why wasn't Friday given an equal narrative voice to Robinson Crusoe? Now,
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep, yep,
I
yep,
gotta
yep,
get
yep.
to this. I can't. I'm getting too excited. Okay. Now, I think this argument is a little bit harder to refute.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I think it's absolute bullshit, but go ahead.
okay, okay. Good. Okay, we have differing opinions. That's good. So here's the reason why is that my first argument is if you ask a question about literature, then it's literary studies. But he's saying you're asking a question about what's not in literature. So it's like now that kind of doesn't seem obvious. Like I ask a question about what's not in a text. Yeah, I'm still giving a commentary on the text. But I think okay, so I think that seems kind of plausible. Okay, here's my objection. I've only read passages from Jane Eyre. Um, so so to keep that in mind. But Jane Eyre, um, as a text, is representing what it's like to be a person in Victorian England. And now, so let's say you ask yourself the question, what was it like to be a person in Victorian England? And somebody says, oh, you can read Jane Eyre to find out. Then you can say, well, no, that's what it's like to be a wealthy white person in Victorian England, like a very wealthy. And now the question is different because if the text is making an argument in the broad sense of argument about 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 what it's like to be in Victorian England, then the sample size is crazy small. And it turns out that the book is not about Victorian England. It's actually about a very particular um a very particular social context. And so now there are all sorts of questions like, well, what are the class relations and power dynamics between people? And how does the plot function? And like, how does that contrast to other literature about what it's like to be a poor person in Victorian England? And so now you're asking, well, what does Jane Eyre leave out? And how does that influence the overall argument of the text? So I still think it's literary studies. So why do you think it's bullshit?
I sorry. I should go out and I should say that I understand that on the surface, if you say someone is not looking at the actual content of the text, they are looking at something that is not in the text, that is not related to the literature because it's not related to what is specifically written in a given book. But I think to say that the study of that is not important or shouldn't be the focus, which kind of feels like what he's saying. I think that's ridiculous for a couple of reasons. The first being, I'll say, because you also gave a bit of a preface, I've not read Jane Eyre. I've not read Jane Austen at all. Um, I did just Google a specific summary. This is going to be the most basic argument, or basically uh, proposed argument that I can come up with here. But according to an Audible, Jane Eyre's summarized by saying it's the story of an orphan who endures hardships, becomes a governess, and falls in love with her enigmatic employer. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if someone's confused why the servants aren't talked about very much or that they don't have voices themselves, it's because it's not relevant to the plot. Um, and so this actually becomes literature, like literary studies, because you're talking about plot at that point. Like
Right.
it's not relevant. And if an author spends too much time focusing on those voices, they're actually drawing attention away from the bulk of the story, which could harm the readability of it. Um, and I think there's an argument to be made because Jane Austen uh, am I correct that Jane Austen wrote Jane Eyre? That is what he said, right? The double Janes is confusing me a little
I
bit
had the
here.
same thought. I'm not sure, to be honest.
I'm
I
just going to
I I,
confirm this.
I
Oh,
only read. I'm
it's
sorry. I just want.
No, you're fine. It's Charlotte Bronte. I'm just going to put that. I'm
Oh, that.
dumb, but
Okay. Yeah, I got. Okay. I got. I made a quick mistake, which is I read Pride and Prejudice, which in my previous argument was about Pride and Prejudice.
oh, that makes sense.
So
That
yeah. So
makes sense.
if what I said doesn't apply to Jane Eyre, that's because I made a little mistake.
No, that's fair. The I just I don't know. I don't read as many classics, but I think it's still fair to say that if you are not focusing on something as an author, it is because you are bringing light to something else. It is because you are trying to do something that is different. Especially with a work that is so prolific as Jane Eyre. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Charlotte Bronte was attempting to tell Jane Eyre's story and not the story of the servants, and so that's why. I'm going to go ahead on another limb, though, and I'll try and be brief because I keep going on these long-winded speeches about this. If we are saying, let's not think about the plot, and we think to ourselves, why are the servants not being talked about? Why do they not have voices? Well, it's probably because they're servants. And this book was written during a time period in which servants did not have voices and were not allowed to voice their opinions. I just think that's probably fair to say. Like it is I don't know if
Yeah.
this is a fair comparison or not. I want to know your thought process on this. But if you read any sci-fi novel that was written in the 80s or 90s, they treat women like objects. That's that's just true. And when people talk about this, and I'm going to be honest, I love a good 80s, 90s sci-fi novel, not for the misogyny, but because I think they're funny to read. Um, you say like, oh, well, it's of the time. Like that is the way that sci-fi was written during that time period for a variety of reasons. And you can totally examine that. And I think the same principle still holds for like, oh, why don't the servants have voices? Because it's of a time where maybe the servants didn't have voices. And now I don't know the answer to that, if that's the case or not. But that just means that that is a researchable thing and therefore is literary studies. And we can focus on that. Colleges aren't ruining us by having us focus on these things. If anything, it's giving us a background in historical research, and intersectionality is really important to have because now when I go out and apply for jobs, I like, oh yeah, I've done historical research too. I'm extra cool. Anyway,
Yeah. No, I agree. There was something I was gonna add. Yeah, yeah. So I want to add on to the point where you said servants didn't have voices. Um, what? Now I'm curious to say, how were servants represented? How does Victorian era literature represent servants? And is that accurate and insightful into the lived experiences of servants? And if you write a book and the servants don't have a voice, well, where do they have voices? Well, first of all, them not having voices in literature is just indicative of the overall political landscape, which is that they don't have voice like political say altogether. Um, yeah. So should I continue?
Yeah,
The
I think so. Yeah,
The idea of equal voice, the idea of the working class being represented, the idea of the troubles of colonialism are all valid topics, all of them, right? And I've read about them and I like them. But the problem is that's sociology, it's not the literature itself. In simple terms, the reason Venice's expanding colonialism isn't talked about in Othello is because Othello's not about that. It's about the nobility of Othello himself and how that crushes him. Jealousy, envy, spite is all in there. Jane Austen's novels are not about the working class. And so to focus on them and give them several pages to the voice of one of the servants would be unrelated to the story. And here's an interesting thing. That betrays a misunderstanding of what
I feel like it's not fair to say. I wish he was. I wish I had read the text he was referring to. Um, but I don't think it's fair to say. Well, I have read Hamlet, but
same.
I don't think it's fair to say. Oh, the text isn't about this, but also it is in the text. Well, is the text about the lack of? Hold up. Okay, I think I need to develop this a little bit further. Give me a second. I wonder if I could refer to a text that that I have stronger command over. I'm looking at my bookshelf. Um, let's take the Iliad. So, um, it's about a war that started over Helen. Um, and you ask yourself, let's see. I think I'll just need to come back to this point. It's not, I don't have it developed enough in my brain.
No, that's totally fair. I do want to say really quick though that I think that at least what you were starting to say was pretty much in the same space as what I was saying a second ago, even that like he's he's saying that because it's not specifically in the written text. It is not specifically talked about that it is not relevant. I think his argument is that the things that are adjacent to but not the text are irrelevant. And I don't think that holds water. Um, I certainly don't think you can condemn the study of that. I'm not even saying that he's condemning it, but it does seem like his focus is on like the actual plot and story of a given piece of literature than it is about related things. Like he says the what is it, the colonialization of Venice and Othello isn't important to Othello because they don't dive into it. But I mean, it's the setting. You can be interested in the setting and you can ask, why is it that way? And it expands your understanding of why the events are unfolding because now you have a deeper understanding of the setting and why the characters may be feeling the way that they're feeling. Like that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying is that if you
Right.
deepen your understanding of an adjacent topic, that apply it deepens your understanding of the main literature as well. They're not separate.
Yeah. Okay. I thank you for that input. I think I'm ready to say my point that I was trying to get at earlier with your help. Okay, let's look at two examples. H.P. Lovecraft and Bram Stoker. Okay,
Ooh.
H.P. Lovecraft, really good was it cosmic horror. None of his books are about racism. But if but if you read H.P. Lovecraft and you never talk about racism, you're making a mistake. because it's like, bro, it's in the text and it's not subtle.
Yep.
But it's not about racism. It's about cosmic horror. It's like, no, okay, you say it's about, I feel like here's you say what is it's about this, it's about this. Okay, here I'm not going to argue about what it's about. Here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in learning and engaging with the text. And if I'm meaningfully and interestingly, valuably engaging with the text, then that I think that's good enough to be counted as literary studies. Well, it's like, but H.P. Lovecraft never wrote about racism, bro. It's because you say it's not about racism, but it's like there's so much of it in the text. So is it about racism? Maybe it's about like white supremacy. You know what I mean? Like the text
Mhm.
presupposes like white supremacy. So and that's not
Yeah.
like a woke thing to say. Like if you haven't read it, go read it. Like it's not subtle. And okay, here and then another example is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I think is interesting. So which I think is actually particularly relevant since we were talking about Jane Austen and Emily and Charlotte Bronte, which um so Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, and now people when they talk about Dracula, sometimes they like to talk about queer approaches to the text, and you're like, well, what the fuck? Like Dracula is not about being gay, it's about like a vampire. Well, part of the horror, from what I've read of secondary sources, and I have read Dracula all the way through, but part of the horror, or okay, one of the cultural uh, attitudes the text draws upon for the narrative to function is that there's a guy who's putting his lips on another guy, specifically like in his blood. And to us, it's like, but that's not even gay. Like that's just like how vampires work. Well, that was pretty um contentious at the time. It's like, whoa, you know,
Yeah. That's an intimate way to attack somebody.
yeah. And so, yeah, the text wasn't about queer theory. But if you take, however, a queer theoretic lens to the text draws out really interesting facts about the narrative of the text. Um, and it's like you're talking about the narrative, like it's literary studies. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to add
I
anything?
I do because you brought up horror, and horror is a really interesting place to bring these things up. Where actually, before I get to that, I want to say this almost goes back to what we were talking about authorial intent, where it's like, did Bram Stoker intend for there to be a sexuality in the way that Dracula attacks people? I don't personally know. I don't personally know, but it's an interesting question to address because it affects the way that people were horrified, especially if it's a guy attacking a guy, because the idea of being attacked in a way that could be perceived as intimate is something that men don't typically experience as much as women. So that is like the horror of that is much more shocking. And you can see the same thing in the first Alien movie. H.R. Geiger, who did all of the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? He did the design of like the xenomorph and the way that it functions. Like that monster or the alien from the movie Alien is based on the idea of sexual assault. Like that is, we know this, it's fundamentally true. The idea of like something foreign and horrifying, like penetrating your body and literally putting something alive inside of you that like grows and bursts out of you violently. Like it is Like you can't. Is the movie Alien about sexual assault? You if you just like asked somebody that, they'd probably say no, because like the word about is nebulous and people take it to mean a lot of different things. But it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like if you want to do an analysis of the movie Alien and you don't talk about how the fact that the xenomorph was sexually assaulting people, like fundamentally, you're missing a huge portion of the context for that story and why it had the effect on people that it did. This guy, his name is Tristan, I believe, was talking about like, oh, you need to study the effect that literature has on people. It's like, okay, well, this isn't something that's addressed by Sigourney Weaver in the movie Alien, but also it's really important to understand that that's why people were freaked out. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that ties in perfectly. That's a point I was going to make about Dracula, but basically a similar thing applies. And or not similar, it's like the same criticism. And I I think a really strong point about the arguments we're making that I want to highlight is that it's like all of this is about understanding the narrative of a text. And I feel like you really I don't think you're going to be able to convince me that you can interrogate a narrative of a text, but you can interrogate the narrative of a piece of literature, yet not be doing literary studies, you know?
Yes. And I want to be more specific because the title of this video that he's got there is How Modern Schools, oh no, that's the different one. Excuse me. Which one? Are Universities Destroying the Classics? I would say definitely if we're answering the question that he poses in the title of his video, the answer is no. They're just exploring them in a different way than he is used to people exploring them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, good point. Okay, hold on. I just started drawing on the screen.
oh,
There's an orange dot right here if you can see
Makes a
it.
good story.
that's funny.
It's like Michelangelo said about the statue of David that he carved. Someone said, "How did how did you produce that?" This may be folkloric, by the way. He says, "David was already in there. All I had to do was chip off the marble. That wasn't him." In other words, crafting a masterpiece is what you leave out, and so all books have to leave things out. Now, the argument could be made, and fair enough, by the way, that yes, but when you look back and at this time there's no one representing the working class or giving them a voice. Okay, so was that a problem in their society? Yes, but what are we talking about then? We're talking about the problems in society. What are we not talking about? We're not talking about the literature itself.
Okay, oh crap.
Now do you understand why you
We already addressed this, but it's like it is about the narrative. It is about the narrative.
get comments from students who say you can get an A or an A minus in English literature as your degree and come out still knowing absolutely nothing? Now you can understand why some say, I went into university with a passion for reading and came out hating it. I've had emails from people who've done their master's degree and they've said after finishing it, they didn't read a book for 10 years because they despised books. What on earth has happened to cause that? That's
Yeah, I want to comment on that because I think that's really interesting to explore. Did you have anything to say though?
Yeah, one time in a single semester, I had 23 books as an English major that I had to read over the course of the semester, and four of them were anthologies. Um, so like obviously I didn't have to read those all back to back, but I'm just gonna go on a limb and say like that is the reason that people get frustrated with reading in college. I think it has less to do with literary studies and more with people are forced to read things that maybe they don't want to read, and are not encouraged to read, in a way that makes them happy. And so because of that, they just develop a distaste for it because it also has to do with like not having a choice over the things that you're reading and bringing to the table. There's more to be
Yeah,
said about that, but I think it has more to do with workload and class structure than it does like the actual process of literary studies.
I completely agree, and I think another factor is that a lot of people. Okay, I'll use myself as an example. Actually, I'll come back to that. A lot of people become an English major because they enjoy reading, and usually they enjoy reading. Well, you can tell me if this assessment is accurate. But I think a lot of people who come into English studies come from a background in reading like young adult fiction,
Mhm.
um, and or or literature that I don't know is somewhat close to that. Maybe like Harry Potter, Twilight, maybe mangas even and comic books.
Yeah.
Those are all super valid, super valuable, and super worthwhile areas of study. However, English as a discipline in academia is just it is should be just as rigorous as any other field. And when you're reading Harry Potter for fun is totally cool, totally valuable, but that's not what it means to be an English major. When you're an English major, it's like, okay, we're spending 1 or 2 weeks on one Harry Potter book, and you have to analyze the narrative. You have to look at uh the role that mysticism plays, or how does the text draw upon Christian and pagan mythology in order to
Mhm.
construct its narrative. It's like, fuck, bro. That's not what I was doing last summer, like before I started university, you know?
Yeah. I read The Hunger Games in high school, and now I'm reading Beloved by Toni Morrison, and Beloved is a different beast. It's-
Right. Yeah, for real. Um, so I think on top of the heavy workload, I think as sad as it is, like you need more than just enjoying literature to be a to be a good English major. Um,
Mhm.
However, I think there are totally valid criticisms of being like the reading load is way too high and this wasn't worth my time because it was so stressful and I didn't even get to read the text that much.
Yeah.
That kind of that kind of general objection I think is worth exploring. Um, but it's like, bro, it people don't dislike being an English major because they have woke nonsense in there. It's because of, you know, the things that we just brought up.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I think that tends to be the case.
The problem. Now, one of the reasons, and only one, this is not the whole reason, is what we've talked about. If you try and weigh something with a thermometer, you're going to be disappointed. Now, imagine you're a student, you go in to university or you're in school and you think, I'm looking forward to digging in and learning about, I know there's something greater in these works and I really would like to draw them out. But then what you talk about is what isn't in the play. It's a bit like complain. I mean, what other topic or study does that happen in? Imagine doing mathematics and you're studying Euclid's geometry, and then the teacher says, now the problem with Euclid's geometry is the lack of baking recipes. Now, obviously,
This is just I might I'm gonna propose the idea of just ending the video here because I'm totally cool with finishing if you want to, but it's like that's just a shit argument. We already told you why. And like that analogy is like obviously like disingenuous. Like I thought his analogies throughout the video so far were not good, but that analogy is just particularly egregious. Um,
Yeah. Especially because I'll throw this out there as like a specific argument against that analogy. The problem is not the analogy, or excuse me, the problem is not the type of comparison he's making, but it's the fact that he didn't include literary studies in it. Because literary studies and Euclidean mathematics are not the same type of thing, and they don't apply to different things equally. Like, what's really interesting is if you take out either one of those things and replace it with literary studies, you actually have a valid area of study. If you take like a science fiction novel, like I can't think of one that specifically would be related to Euclidean geometry, but like if you look at like The Martian, which was written, I forget who the author is, but it was written to be with the technological understanding of the time to be as accurate and realistic as possible. If you like do a mathematical analysis of that, that's fascinating. The same thing is true in Futurama. Like they had scientists like fact check everything that they did as scientifically accurate as possible. Like that's really interesting and you can really get into that.
Yeah.
Likewise, if you do literary studies and baking, one of the books we read for class at one point was like Water for Chocolate, which is a romance that is has actual recipes in it and is like a whole thing where it uses like the structure of a recipe to enhance the novel. That's another form thing. Beth Lorden would love that. But like it's just that he chose two things that are incompatible. If you just replace one of them with literary studies, it is a different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Mhm.
But yeah, no, if you wanna end the video here, that's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure that I gave a specific uh counterpoint to that because that was not that was not a valid argument. I will say I appreciate him for being the analogies were a little disingenuous at times. It seems like he really cares and he seems like he's trying to put arguments together. It just I would say that his view of literature, like I was saying at the beginning of this, is incomplete. It is a focus on written text and not the surrounding context. And if that's the way he views literature, then the arguments he has hold water. It's just, I think that that is a poor way to view literature.
Yeah. No, I agree. One thing I want to add too is that I feel like a lot of these because I've seen a lot of videos like this, and usually they end with something like, since academia sucks and you don't want to study English, join my paid reading group where we
Oh,
actually
yeah.
talk about English. Well, it's like, well, no, damn, like it's just one big advertisement. Okay, but I want to draw a bigger point, which is that I think that this video, even though it doesn't have that many views, I think the general trend of anti-intellectualism is becoming particularly prominent in US politics. And this is just like the exact outgrowth of the broader picture, which
Hmm.
is people are, because, yeah, I don't know. I think I'll stop there. Because honestly, that'll probably come out a lot more in these two videos. I think we only have time for one more, so which one do you want to go to?
I think the one that's closer in topic to this would be how modern schools make terrible writers deliberately. The absolute degeneracy of modern writing is more of a video, in case anyone sees this and wants to watch it. It's more of a video on the intense sexuality in quote unquote what she refers to as women's literature, or at least refers to other people referring to as women's literature. Things like A Court of Thorns and Roses. Is that the thing? Anything in that sort of type where it's like intensely romantic and occasionally erotic and like the dangers of that. This is much more about writers at large.
Yeah, this video is particularly long, so it might be helpful to skip around a little bit. So, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you have made a trip to your local bookstore anytime in the last decade, but if you have, then you've probably noticed that writing isn't really what it used to be. What does that mean, you ask?
Okay, again, another ideologically conservative point of view doesn't mean that it's wrong. Like, just in virtue of being conservative doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's wrong. But just to point out, it's like, look at art today. It sucks. Why can't it be how it used to be? And, we don't, like, we haven't assessed her argument yet. So I'm not saying what she's saying is false, but it is conservative. So it's important
I
to keep that in mind.
I agree. I'll also throw this out there because I think this is important context for her as a person. This is, oh, I just looked her up. Um, where Hillary Lane. She mentions it in this particular video, but she was homeschooled, at least for a part of her upbringing. It sounded like she was pretty young when that happened. I forget when. But also, she says on her website that she says, I did not go to college and opted instead to travel and teach myself. Everything I know I've taught myself. It has taken a long time and it's been a lot of work, but every inch of it was worth it. I think that's an important, as we apply this to anything in like high school settings or college settings, to understand that she does not have personal experience with those settings.
That's a that is a really good point. I'm happy you brought that up because I think that will help give some context about one of the objections I was going to make on her view of critical literacy. So, did you want to add anything else before I play it?
No, just that context.
To be clear, what I'm talking about here is prose itself, not the content of the books, not the stories that they're telling, but the prose, the language with which the story is being told. Clarity, imagery, flow, the command the writer has of the English language, and so on. Bad prose in modern books takes many forms. The writing itself can be horrendous, but even when it's not, even when the writing isn't actively punching you in the face every other sentence, it all still just kind of reads the same, like the same person wrote it all. If you've ever received a work email sprinkled with emojis, then you might have found yourself scratching your head. Or maybe not. Maybe such occurrences are so commonplace now that you barely notice them. I personally have seen numerous articles online explaining the professional number of emojis one may use in work emails, so maybe I'm just behind the curve. If you want
Yeah,
Bro,
pause that. Pause that.
you go.
Do okay. Uh, First of all, saying, have you ever noticed how all stories read the same these days? That is an opinion. That is not a fact. I'm just going to throw that out there. If you find authors that you like, they probably have a unique style and are worth reading. And as someone, I mentioned 80s and 90s sci-fi literature. I have read books that all sound like they were written by the same person. And I got to tell you, I get a kick out of reading those books because some of them are just hilarious to read. It's like academic junk food. I don't know how to describe it. It's just a good time. The other thing I want to say, uh, randomly trashing emojis in work emails. That's it. Like I forget if this is the video where she talks about elitism. That's an elitist thing to say. I'm just gonna throw that out.
Mhm.
Work emails have a variety of reasons why you would write them. The audience matters a lot. Again, I'm gonna call back to I have a degree in professional business writing. Uh,
Yeah.
it is not the most professional thing to do necessarily, but there's also been a huge movement towards informality in work emails that was not the case when she was growing up. So I'm just throwing that out there.
No, that is such a good point. I think you highlighted two aspects that I want to reiterate, which is the audience. Well, the primary thing is what, okay, the two main questions you want to ask yourself is you're writing a business text, I guess in this case an email. What is the purpose and who's the audience?
Mhm.
And different levels of tone will be the appropriate, they'll be will be the appropriate level of tone for that text. And some people, if you talk too formally to them, they get weirded out or they
Yeah.
think, and I send, okay, another thing, yeah, I'm not, no, I don't recommend like, oh, just put emojis in random emails.
Agreed.
Um, but if the context calls for it, then it's appropriate. And I don't know, to me, it just feels like a diss. Like, look at this BuzzFeed article. It talks about putting emojis in top 10 emojis you should put in your emails. Isn't that stupid? It's like, bro, it's not that serious.
Yeah, it's BuzzFeed. People write articles about that all the time. It's not that serious. Also, every professional environment is different, and just show like a modicum of respect to people. And once you develop a relationship, communicate with them in the way that is most efficient and most communicative. That's it.
Exactly. In fact, in fact, if emojis convey a kind of informal, like close tone, that could even be beneficial for your work relationships because it shows that like you have a kind of rapport, you know what I mean, with people. So
Sure.
we'll get more to the substance, but it's just like little things like this. I feel like she makes a bunch of little comments like this throughout the whole video where it's like, seriously, like come on.
I will say before we start again, she does strike me as significantly more passive aggressive, or at least eye rolly than the previous guy. I don't know. I forget again. I forget if it's this video or the other one. I watched about a third of each of them before we started this. But there are times where like she'll make a comment and then just cut to her sipping her coffee, like bombastic side eye for a second, and it's just you're just being coy. Let's just acknowledge that she's being a little bit disingenuous at times. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but like she has strong opinions and really seems to be frustrated with other people.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. And I do value the tone that the first video took because at least the first video, he was saying like, this is my view. Other people hold this view and it's interesting. I just don't think it fits with mine. And you know what? That's admirable because even though I disagree with him, he's not being, I think the way he approached it is the way argument should be approached, generally speaking. And this one is just very biased. It's not like you can't have biased texts. But when your arguments aren't strong, it just gets really annoying.
Yeah. Again, I will say, just for the sake of us, we understand that we are a minute and 5 seconds into this video. Like, we'll get like I'm not trying to like shit on her or anything like that. We'll get to whatever points we need to talk about, but it's just, the tone is different. It is already markedly different.
True, true.
On a smartphone, chances are you've got a Grammarly keyboard or some other AI typing assistant that automatically double checks your grammar and your wording and suggests alterations. If you've spent any time in contact with the digital world, then chances are you've come across blocks of text that were absolutely written by someone leaning hard on their AI writing assistant, which admittedly isn't quite the same as using AI to write, but it nevertheless presents the same lack of humanity and lack of clarity. And also, more to the point, it presents the same core problem. Call me a Luddite, call me old-fashioned, call me whatever you like, but this strange reliance on machine aid in basic writing is very, very worrying. Not just because we are now apparently living in a world where books written to varying degrees with AI assistants are winning major prestigious literary awards, but mainly because this over-reliance on technology actually indicates that some kind of deficit already existed, which created a need for these artificial aids. That's something I want to make very clear. AI writing is absolutely killing aspiring writers' ability to put together stories and prose on their own, but there's a reason people immediately found AI assistants so tempting and appealing. The problem with writing already existed. AI just offered an artificial solution. There's a reason people are leaning so hard on their Grammarly
Can we
keyboards.
pause here for
There's
a
a reason
second?
people go
I just want to say that everything that she has said about AI, in particular AI writing and AI assistants, and how like people are relying on them too heavily and it's killing creativity, I 100% agree with everything that she just said. All right.
Yeah. I'll I will say I agree with that. The point where I don't agree is that her explanation for why people are going to lit see like I agree, but then she says the reason why people are doing that is because they have no literacy. And they have no literacy because of this woke nonsense that was in high school and first and second year college curricula. So that's so I agree with you and I agree with her. But as we continue, I think that's where the objection starts.
straight to ChatGPT when they want to write a novel or a poem or a sweet text to the girlfriend. Okay, there are a lot of reasons, but a big, huge commonality in all these reasons is this. People no longer know how to write. And even when they try, even when we give them awards for doing so well, arguably, they cannot write well. Not anymore. Writing well is a dying art. My question is, why?
Okay, one thing I do want to highlight, and I really want to let him speak, but I do want to say I do agree that um, literacy and people's abilities to rigorously engage with text and produce their own text, um, as far as I'm aware, like from empirical data, is accurate. Um,
Yeah.
If If you want to figure out why people can't write well, can't express or articulate themselves anymore, you have to go all the way back. The first wave of damage that has been done to the minds of would-be writers occurred in elementary school. I would assume that very few writers starting out these days learn to read using phonics, although you do see phonics implemented a little more these days, but never exclusively and never without the added damaging hindrances of whole language, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But even if Gen X and the millennials did eventually learn how to read, studies have shown that readers who learned using word association or whole language have less reading comprehension than those who learned using phonics. Again, give me a second, I'll talk about studies and sources in just a minute. Most casual readers I come across in my daily life don't know grammar. They don't know what it means to diagram a sentence. They don't know what it means to conjugate a verb or identify noun and verb agreement. Most people these days don't know how to spell. How many times have you seen those posts of girls talking about how much they love the smell of their boyfriend's colon? We've reached a point now where it's deemed elitist to know which their or your
Okay,
is the right
can
one
we
to use
pause
in a
for a
given
second?
context. Forget current.
I do want to say she made a comment about how many times do you see people misspelling the word cologne and saying like girls talking about how they love the smell of their boyfriend's colon. Um, that's copy pasta. I don't know if that she's aware of that. People understand when they post that, especially these days, that that is not how you spell that. I'm sure that someone made that mistake at some point, but most the fact that those are like basically the same, like people are posting that to be funny. It's I don't, it's maybe not as serious as what she's saying.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay. So, um, my master's, whereas yours is in creative writing, mine focused on the teaching of writing. So I feel like I don't know what composition and rhetoric courses you've taken, but have you have you taken well actually it doesn't matter. But if I didn't work an 11-hour shift today, I was going to do more research on this. So I'm very disappointed that I wasn't able to come with more sources. However, I have this book with me that there was a quote I wanted to find. I'm going to continue playing it, but I will come back to it.
Okay.
Year education, which I'm sure is atrocious. Even when I was in school, they had abandoned this focus in education. In place of what? I don't know. In the 2 years I was in public school, all we did was watch movies, learn about drugs, and glue small pieces of paper to larger pieces of paper. In fourth grade, they also learned how to put condoms on bananas. I'm not sure why fourth graders would need to know how to use condoms, but that's a subject for another day. My father had to teach me how to read himself.
Okay, sex ed is important, and if you don't think so, then I just think you should rethink your life. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna say I don't know if it's necessarily about them being fourth graders and more about destigmatizing sex education when kids are younger. People have differing opinions on this. I don't think it's wrong. I think that usually when people tell horror stories about this, it's about the teacher and not about the curriculum. So that's a different kind of problem.
Yeah,
That's that's PE teachers doing something that's strange.
yeah.
Using hooked on phonics in the summer between first and second grade. Around the time my father figured out how ludicrous and pointless school had become, he pulled me out and homeschooled me. I managed to achieve a pretty high reading level pretty quickly by nothing more than a little spiteful tenacity and my father's hard work. We definitely need to avoid meaningless excuses like privilege and elitism. Oppression and elitism is not why I couldn't read in the second grade. Privilege is not why I graduated from high school 10 years later with a 4.0 GPA. My family was not wealthy and had to work all the time like everyone else's families, and yet with some help, I still managed to figure out how to read and how to identify parts of speech. So instead of talking about privilege and victimhood, let's talk about
Bro, okay, good job on her. I'm happy to hear that. That is a very weak argument. You can't say, look at me, I'm an example of success. Therefore, if you didn't succeed, systemic inequalities had no impact on your ability to have literacy.
Yeah,
It's just a weak argument. Hey,
it's what survivorship bias, isn't that applicable here?
yeah, yeah.
facts. I know some of you hate that word, but I'm sure you can cope. So here are some nice, light facts to start with. The question is, why can't anyone write well anymore? There are a lot of reasons behind this, but we're going to focus our
Wait, pause
attention
it.
today on what
Pause
is
it. Two
by
seconds.
far
The question is not why can't people write well anymore. The question is why people can't articulate themselves well anymore. I want to sort of split hairs with that because the basis of her question is coming from what she said earlier, which is why does everything sound the same these days? and like why she doesn't seem to like modern writing. And I think that that is highly opinionated. But I will say that the argument, if someone is to say that people are struggling to articulate themselves and utilize their internal monologue, if they have one, because I guess some people don't, that's a whole interesting psychological thing. But being able to articulate themselves in a way that accurately represents the ideas that they're having, that's important. That is a skill that is being a bit lost right now. She's right about that. But let's just draw some attention to the fact that this is slightly opinionated. It's not necessarily just that maybe there are facts that are boosting her opinion on this, but it is based in what she does and does not like.
Yeah. No, I agree. Uh,
The biggest: education and critical literacy. Okay, first of all, I know how much you all love sources, and for today's topic, I'll concede. This data isn't all widely known. Therefore, I've compiled a huge list of sources explaining the literacy controversy, explaining the superiority of phonics, and also, if you're interested, how, billionaire industrialists and also the actual government, if you'll pardon my tin hat, deliberately undermined the education system of America over 100 years ago. I put all this together on my website. There's a link in the description. When I first heard the term critical literacy, I was foolish enough to assume that it meant literacy that involved the ability to think critically and to analyze.
okay. I want to comment on that specific sentence, which I think you gave some insight to. Personally, I think there's a little bit of irony in being like, where has literacy gone? And then you say, I read about critical literacy, but I thought it meant this. It turns out it meant this. And it's like, I'm sorry, but if you knew what critical theory was, you would know that like critical literacy is like draws upon critical theory to make its arguments. And it's just it's not a big point, but it's a little bit ironic to me because it's like um my research in my master's was a subfield of critical discourse analysis. And so a discourse analysis and critical discourse analysis are different, where critical discourse, okay, super short, not super insightful description is that discourse analysis is a way of analyzing texts. Uh, yeah, critical discourse analysis is a way of analyzing texts with a particular lens that comes out of the critical theory of the Frankfurt School. If people don't know what that is, that's fine. Probably, you're probably a nerd if you do know what that means. Um, but that's fine. However, to be like, there's just a little bit of irony in saying critical literacy, that's not what I thought it meant. Well, read some theory, Not saying you even have to agree with it, but
Is the meaning of the text by one's own power. Turns out, I was wrong. Critical literacy is defined as learning to read and write as part of the process of becoming conscious of one's experience as historically constructed within specific power relations. Critical literacy moves the reader's focus away from the self in critical reading to the interpretation of texts in different environmental and cultural contexts. Further, critical literacy provides opportunities for readers to determine their ability to discern the purpose of texts and also their ability to identify ideologies presented in the texts. As they read, individuals can accept, reject, or reconstruct the ideologies presented in the text to support their own life experiences. We're not going to dig into this.
okay. Do you have
The
anything to add?
editing on that is absolutely crazy. I, she refers back to jargon a couple of times coming up here about how like this is a bit jargony. It is a bit jargony. If you just read those sentences slowly and go through, like, it is very clear what they're talking about. They are giving a pretty wide or well, maybe not wide definition. They're giving a pretty specified and detailed definition. I the squinting that she's doing about this bothers me. I don't know if there's anything objectively, morally, ethically wrong with her doing that in this video, but the concept of just like I'm gonna read a little bit of this and be like, what? I don't know. It comes off as elitist to me, even though she's arguing against elitism.
Yeah, I also would I agree. I want to add that I think the reason that I find that all those cuts frustrating is that it's implying like she'll say something and then cut away to her making a weird face. And it's like the implication is, what the fuck did I just read? Why the fuck are we giving this to our children? So I I didn't find that particularly objectionable. Yeah, there's ideology in text. That's not a particularly woke claim to make. Um and I don't know. So
Yeah. And like given we have a background with this kind of language, so like we're a little bit biased towards just being able to understand that, and it's not like that crazy, but I don't know. I feel like I'm leaning towards like picking apart the editing stuff, and I should let her talk a little bit more before jumping in.
Yet, but I want you to keep these definitions in mind as we proceed. Critical literacy, as it is called, and as I have just defined, is the new literacy. Begun in spirit by Paulo Freire, and then more solidly presented by Ira Shore in his 1980 book, Critical Teaching in Everyday Life, critical literacy aims to teach not literacy, but rather a kind of social awareness, which was using teaching reading as a delivery method of sorts, as if reading was just the syringe, and this right kind of social awareness was the real thing they wanted the child to receive. Let me show you one quote from this book that should pretty adequately illustrate critical literacy in action. Prior to scheduling classes, Freirean educators study the life and language of their prospective students. These sociological inquiries permit them to discover a small number of keywords from daily life called generative words, which will be used for both problematizing experience and for literacy teaching. The generative words like brick, rice, slum, or wealth suggest social themes around which consciousness can then be raised. The concept of critical literacy then infected the education world. Within 2 decades, it had been adopted by the US government as an aspect of ESL programs. By the 90s, it had quickly but completely become the new literacy. I have a couple quotes from Shore's book and the list of links on my website. If you're curious as to just how disturbing this is, have a read. When people in modern academic and education circles talk about literate kids or teaching literacy, this critical literacy is to them the ultimate sign of success. If they can produce a critically literate adult, then they've done their job. Before we get too deep into the effects of critical literacy, which is an extremely crucial aspect of the topic at hand, why no one can write anymore, we should first try to define actual literacy. That is the ability to read, which of course is the twin brother of the ability to write. We also need to look at the way actual literacy has entered a sharp, alarming decline, which is, and I'll demonstrate this, directly linked to the implementation of critical literacy. That is, actual literacy began to decline when critical literacy became the goal. Defining literacy is a hot topic in education circles. It's divisive and somehow controversial. Even putting aside the jargon-heavy newspeak of critical literacy, the assessment of adults' ability to actually read text on a page or screen is a hot-button issue, which isn't hard to understand. As literacy rates in America drop, everyone's first honest instinct is, well, there must be something wrong with the quality of the education. I mean, education tends to reply with various bizarrely worded definitions of literacy as if to say, no, literacy is not in decline. What you're talking about isn't literacy. And then people start arguing about that, and then the whole issue becomes a pointless shouting match. So, before we get into the rest of it, I want to attempt to talk about what literacy even means. I mean, a definition we can all agree on so that as we talk about this issue, we can all be on the same page, so to speak. Let's put aside all the jargon-heavy definitions that get thrown around by all the players. Instead, let's look at the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, PIAAC. Literacy is accessing, understanding, evaluating, and reflecting on written texts in order to achieve one's goals, to develop one's knowledge and potential, and to participate in
Let
society.
me pause here.
This is still pretty jargon heavy.
I just want to throw out, I don't see personally a crazy amount of difference between this definition and the previous definition. The previous definition was more specific. I didn't think it was that much more jargon heavy, if at all. And I just, literacy and critical literacy in her definitions, which I do appreciate her defining her terms because that is something that Tristan did not do in his video. Um, I just feel like they're not that different. And she goes on to talk about phonics, and like how that develops one's ability to like read, write, spell, speak, all of those things at the same time. And I think phonics are good. I was actually raised with phonics in school. Like we sounded stuff out. It wasn't like we used hooked on phonics, but like it was the same thing. Um, I just I feel like there's not a crazy difference between the things that she's saying are very different. And maybe I'm just not understanding. What do you feel about this?
I agree. Let's see if we could find the definition.
PIAAC. Literacy is accessing, understanding.
Okay. I think the part, okay. Basically, literacy is the ability to understand and produce text in order to achieve your goals and yeah, participate in society, which yeah, I mean basically what it said. I think understanding the ideological framework of a text is essential to understanding what role that text is performing rhetorically
Mhm.
and even civically. I think um, I've been doing a lot of research on how people interpret and engage with political texts and how that like relates to their belief formation and stuff. And people don't engage with them very rigorously. And I
No.
feel like uh yeah. And so no, then I think I'm just gonna I think I'm just reiterating your point, which is what exactly is the difference between the two definitions? It doesn't seem very strong. Now
Yeah.
I will
Oh,
you go.
no, please go ahead.
I, I'm not saying that uh literacy just like regular literacy, I don't know what you would call it, is identical to critical literacy, but like they're arguably like far more similar than she's taking them to be.
Yeah. I think the major difference that I'm seeing between the two of them is specificity. This particular definition of literacy, as opposed to the definition of critical literacy in the article that she was showing, the major difference that I'm seeing is the amount of detail and applications. This definition, if you were like saying that like, oh, well, understanding like if I were to say, uh, well, I think that in addition to this definition that we've got on screen, like understanding the ideologies and context behind a piece is really important to understand. That's part of understanding, evaluating, and reflecting. That's a part of it. Like this is reducing the number of this is reducing the amount of complexity in the definition at the expense of specificity.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, since you have to leave soon, I was wondering if you would be interested in skipping to the part where she talks about. Did you get to the part where she talks about the study they don't read well, where they read Charles Dickens?
I have not seen that part.
Okay. Hmm. Maybe let me think if we should go to that thing because it was. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, maybe it's this section. Okay, I'll explain. Well, if you haven't, I guess, I guess I'll explain it and we'll watch a little bit and then we can close it out here and then maybe return another time. But here's basically the study. Two Kansas universities. There are two Kansas universities and you got some graduate researchers doing a study and or at least are facilitating the study. And well, here's what they do. They say, let's take 84 or 85 students, all English majors, some freshmen all the way to some seniors, and we're gonna ask them to interpret 7 paragraphs from Charles Dickens' text, Bleak House. And then they ask questions about their interpretation. And basically the results came back to the majority, according to the researchers, had were classified as being problematic readers, where they couldn't read Bleak House to a sufficient degree. and like a small minority like were in like piece of like I forget the other two tiers, but there's problematic, and then there's like a medium tier and like a higher tier.
For sure.
And I read the study on its own, and I have, which we could talk about another time, but I have some methodological critiques of the study. However, I think the study is pretty interesting, so I guess we could just see how she lays it out, and then we can we can close this out when it's ready for you to leave.
I agree with that. Give me 2 seconds because I just want to show, like, in case anyone sees this and hasn't specifically read Dickens, this is important. I have two texts right next to me that I'm going to read excerpts of, and one of them is Dickens and one of them is not, and they were written within 10 years of each other in 1830 to 1840. I'm pretty sure that's true. Give me, I just, this is important for people to understand. All right, and they're both travel narratives about someone uh from like the UK coming to America for the first time and experiencing it. So this is as close of a comparison between two people as it can kind of get, right? I heard with pleasure that it was to the Virginian side of the Potomac that the Felicity hunters of Washington resorted to see this fearful wonder, for I never saw a spot where I should less have liked the annoying howdy of a casual recont. I don't know that word off the top of my head. Anyway, uh, that was relatively, you can understand what's being said there, and I'm gonna open up this other one, and we're gonna see what happens.
I'm not sorry, one second. I'm not picking up your audio. Can you say something real quick?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Okay, it looks like it's still coming through. Maybe it's just on my end. I'm sorry.
I
You
think
continue what you're
no, you're
saying. I'll
fine.
figure out what's going on.
Oh, is the recording still probably picking this up? I'm gonna assume yes. I'm gonna read this other one. Uh, Here we go. I was only present in one of these establishments during the hours of instruction, and the boys' department, which was full of little urchins, varying in their ages, I should say, from 6 years old to 10 or 12, the master offered to institute an extemporary examination of the pupils in algebra, a proposal which, as I was by no means confident of my ability to detect mistakes in that science, I declined with some alarm. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that the second one that I just read, which is Dickens, is just a little bit trickier. And I didn't pick, I'm literally just opening these books and just in the middle. I'm not hand picking any of these, but like if you have not tried to read Dickens, it is not like reading a normal novel. It is more difficult than that. Partially because of the time period, partially because of the verbiage, and partly because it's Charles Dickens. I had a friend of mine, joke that some people think that the reason Dickens wrote the way he did is because he was paid by the word. Like, that's he's very wordy and very difficult to read.
Mhm.
So if you're using him as a basis for people's abilities to read in the modern day, that's maybe not fair. It is certainly biased against someone being able to understand what's being said. Also, for anyone who cares, um, this is Charles Dickens' American Notes. It's all of the volumes. This I have the Penguin Classics version, and then the other book I was reading was Domestic Manners of the Americans by Fanny Trollope. Frances Milton Trollope is her full name, who is generally speaking much more readable. I have found in the class where I'm currently reading both of them, um, and that's a very contentious novel, so fun to look up. So
Next,
yeah, Dickens is hard to read.
bro, I agree. Like I was like, I'm I'm working my way through some difficult text right now, and I pulled up the study and I started reading the passages, and I was like, fuck, bro. Like I got to pull up
Yeah,
the dictionary for this one.
it's intense. It's really intense. Did you catch the first reading that I did as well?
I got about like a third of it.
Okay, that's fine. Frances Milton Trollope, like the way that she writes, because it's adapted from a journal that she was keeping at the time, is so like casual and informal, and like she's using proper sentence structure and stuff like that, but it's so much more comparable to like a modern speech than
Mhm.
Dickens. It's like not even close. It's very silly to me. Um, I'll throw this out there because I think it's humorous. It's not related, but in Domestic Manners of the Americans, Fanny Trollope specifically writes that Kentuckian men are particularly strapping and attractive, except when, and I quote, disfigured by red hair, which is frequent.
Damn, sorry to hear that for
Since
you,
I'm
bro.
not since I'm not visible, I have red hair. And it was deeply upsetting and also very funny to read. Um, but yeah, that's unrelated.
What is it? What do you see right now? Is it showing my Minecraft page? My home screen?
Yeah, all I'm seeing is you on your Mac homepage.
Oh, I was trying. Do you see like our Zoom now?
I see a black screen behind you.
Dang, this whole time I was looking at you. I had I had our faces pulled up. I guess no one will see our faces. I think I think your contribution right there is a good place to leave off for now.
Fair enough, fair enough. I do want to return to this. I think that Hillary Lane is interesting in her arguments. I think that she's got a lot of research that she has done. She seems very knowledgeable in these areas. I do think that there is some opinion-based flaw in, well, we didn't get to both of her videos because we had another one from her, that also, while less rooted in opinion, I think both of the videos from her are like major social issues that people have differing opinions on. So not to say that she's wrong necessarily, but I think that she's definitely on a different side than I'm on for at least the video that we watched. The other one's more interesting, but it gets into the ethics of like extreme sexuality in media and like how that affects men versus women and the ethics of it. And it's it is interesting, but it's complex.
Okay. Thank you for your input. We
Yeah.
will return, and I will have had a weekend to do research.